Assalamu alaikum, my name is Halimah and welcome to Qur'an Rehab. Alhamdulillah, a while ago Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed me with the ability to complete my memorization of Surah Al-Baqarah. And a lot of people have asked me how I did this and how I generally go about memorizing the Qur'an. And sometimes when they ask, I sense a frustration, which I can completely understand and relate to. And that's because although there's a lot of information out there on the virtues of memorizing Qur'an, etc., there isn't very much available on how to practically go about doing so. So I've created this short video of 6 simple but practical tips on how to memorize Qur'an, inshallah. Now these tips are a combination of techniques that I've learned from my previous studies in accelerated learning and memorization, combined with direct techniques I've learned from my amazing and inspirational Qur'an teacher, Sister Samah, who I love very dearly. Now these are techniques that I use on a daily basis and have done for quite some time now, so inshallah I hope that they will be of benefit to you also on your Qur'an journey. Tip 1. When reading and memorizing the Qur'an, always ensure to use a pencil to guide your eyes. A pencil of this width and length is ideal. In the very least, use your finger to do so. Now I know it sounds simple, but without using a pencil, you're not actually visually absorbing or imprinting the words of the Qur'an into your memory. Instead, you're just superficially reading or skimming the words. And proof of this is demonstrated in our ability to still be able to read sentences like this, where the letters of a word are mixed up. Now you yourself can test the effectiveness of this technique by asking somebody to stand in front of you and instruct them to create an invisible circle in the air using their eyes. And then ask them to follow the circle your pencil will create in the air. And if you look carefully at their eye movement, you'll notice how disjointed the first attempt is compared to the second attempt. So by using a pencil or using our finger, we're just creating that necessary focus to memorize what we're reading. Now usually when I'm memorizing the Qur'an, I will read a verse approximately 15 to 20 times using my pencil, visually looking at the words before I even attempt to abandon my pencil and try to recall those ayat by heart. Tip 2. When memorizing the last verse on a page, always ensure to memorize the following verse on the top of the next page. This will help to ensure the fluidity when you recite that which you've memorized by heart, because people usually stumble in the transition between pages. Tip 3. Now our brains are constantly taking in hundreds of pieces of information subconsciously in order for us to stay alert of our environment and to stay alive. And that's because our conscious mind is only ever able to process up to several pieces of information at one time. So without even realizing, by listening to the selected verses we wish to memorize throughout the day, even subconsciously as we go about doing our day-to-day business, we actually give ourselves the potential to improve and strengthen the memorization of those verses. So those who know me well will tell you that I always have headphones in. So whether that's going to and from work or sitting at my desk in the office, and even whilst I sleep, I listen to those ayat on headphones or I allow them to play out loud on a laptop. Because subhanAllah, even when we sleep, our subconscious mind is fully functioning. So by using these auditory senses, even subconsciously, inshallah, we can improve our memorization of those Quranic verses, inshallah. Tip 4. When reading and memorizing the Qur'an, try and avoid holding your Qur'an down here with your eyes cast down in this way. When our brains are trying to visually recall an image from our memory, we naturally look up and towards the left. So when I read Qur'an, I tend to hold the Qur'an at least to eye level, if not slightly higher and towards the left, just to assist my brain in its natural processes. Tip 5. Have you realized how it's always easier to recall in detail the beginning and end of something, like an incident, a book or a movie, than the middle? Now this actually happens with our studies and our Qur'an memorization as well. And that's because our natural memory rhythms run so that our memory recall is at its peak at the beginning of a study session and the end of a study session. And in between it decreases and dips. Now this happens even if we fully understand and comprehend what we're studying and what we're reading, because interestingly our cycles of understanding and our cycles of memorization run independently of each other. So although it's beneficial for us to ensure we do read the translation and study the tafsir of Quranic ayat, we must note that our ability to memorize and recall those ayat will decrease the longer we continue in our study period. And the solution to managing these dips is actually to take short, smartly spaced breaks in between. By taking these strategic breaks, we are ensuring that A, we are giving ourselves the necessary time to actually absorb what we're reading and learning, because our transfer of this information into our memory actually happens shortly after we finish our study period, as opposed to during that period of study. B, because our peak memory recalls happen at the beginning and the end of a learning session, instead of just having one long period of study where we have 2 peaks, we're actually creating multiple peaks in our memory recall every time we come back from a break. And C, we're actually giving our mind and our body time to physically relax. And we know that long periods of studies actually creates a tension and a strain on our bodies, and this effect on our physiology can affect our emotions and our energy levels too. So by taking breaks, inshallah, we can come back more refreshed. Now, our brains usually can't focus for more than about 20 to 50 minutes. So ideally, it's good to take a break after every half an hour of study. And these breaks should ideally be between a minimum of 2 minutes to a maximum of 10 minutes. And I usually take the full 10 minutes. And that's because our memory recall is actually at its highest 10 minutes after we've finished a study period. So I tend to start every new period of study by recalling what I learned previously. I do this actually at the beginning and end of a session. This helps to make your memorization solid and to give you that boost of confidence as well to continue. And whilst touching on the topic of time, it's really important and interesting to note that we forget approximately 80% of what we read and memorize just after 24 hours of studying it. And that's because the transfer of information from our short-term to our long-term memory is actually a separate procedure that requires consistent repetition. Now, memory experts say that in the very least, to assist our minds in this process, we should review what we've memorized at least 10 minutes after the study session, 1 week after that study session, 1 month, and then 3 to 6 months in the very least. Tip 6. Have you noticed how some Quranic verses seem to be more easier to memorize and recall than others? Perhaps this is more obvious with verses that relate to stories given to us, like that of the prophets, for example. Why is this exactly? Well, it's because there are certain elements in things like stories, such as vivid imagery and time frames, for example, that help to create links and associations in our mind that just make it easier for us to recall them. How can we use this knowledge and transfer it to those verses that we're struggling to memorize? Well, what I tend to do when I'm struggling with the remembering the order of certain ayats, for example, is I tend to use a type of linking system. Now, this linking system is essentially where I take an object or an item from each of the verses, or at least a word that I can create a visual image for, and then I tend to create a visual type of link between these verses, a storyboard if you like, one that's of course is respectful and appropriate to the Qur'an. For example, I recall struggling with remembering the order of the verses 187 to 189 of Surah Al-Baqarah. Now, in the first of these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about rules and regulations related to fasting. So being able to eat until dawn and then again after dusk, etc. And the second of those verses related to the prohibition of devouring people's wealth and property unjustly. And then the third of those verses related to the lunar calendar and Hajj season and the etiquettes of entering one's home from the front doors as opposed to the back door, etc. So when I was reciting the first of these verses, I would visualize 2 people sitting at a hand-carved wooden table next to a huge beautiful window with the moon shining through, it being the time of iftar, and the first person is breaking their fast on delicious food and drink. And then as I would come to reciting the second verse, I would visualize the second person at the table physically devouring money. Then as I came to reciting the third verse, to prompt me, I would visualize a third person walking into the room from the front door as opposed to the back door in relation to the Quranic verse again, and they would inquire about the lunar calendar and the Hajj season, etc. So this type of visual association just makes it easier to recall those Quranic verses. So these are just a few of the tips and techniques I use to memorize the Qur'an, and I hope that they will be beneficial to you also, inshallah. My name is Halima. You've been checked into Qur'an Rehab, so until next time, inshallah, take care.